by literally printing enough money to replenish the empty accounts of those who were snapped away. This, however, causes yet another big problem: inflation. Even just with 2020, the United States Federal Reserve hasn't exactly been reserved about printing a lot of money to infuse into the parts of the economy that needed it the most over the last 18 months. We're seeing tons of articles about inflation actually happening right here, right now, as we speak, because that's just what happens when the market floods with a lot of new money. For us, inflation might be more temporary, but in a post-blip world, the amount of money that would have to be printed to reimburse 3.5 billion people would cause inflation at a level that is impossible to comprehend. Imagine every country in the world just printing banknotes. They immediately become useless pieces of paper. If you need a primer on inflation, we actually covered it in depth over on Game Theory when we talked about the World of Warcraft economy. Now, when inflation gets out of control, it's called hyperinflation, and you can see modern examples of it in places like Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe's troubles began in the 1990s when dictator Robert Mugabe instituted a racial policy to evict white landowners from their farms and replace them with black farmers instead. However, many of these newly landed farmers had no farming experience and little in the ways of capital to finance things like equipment. So in just a few years, Zimbabwe's food output had dropped nearly 45%. However, Mugabe wanted to continue intervening in wars in his region and thus started printing Zimbabwe dollars to pay for his military. At its peak, Zimbabwe was experiencing a staggering 89.76 trillion% annual inflation. Any money that you acquired at the beginning of the year was completely worthless by the end of the year. To put that kind of inflation into perspective, with numbers like that, it would make Jeff Bezos, the world's richest man at $186 billion, worth a fraction of a penny in a year. Now, obviously things wouldn't be that bad for most countries printing money for the blip citizens, since the most that they would probably do is increase inflation by 100%, but that's still way more inflation than most countries can handle. Right after its founding in 1776, the United States experienced the most inflation in its history, with its currency inflating 29.78%. It is never a good solution, but it is technically a solution. Now, for people like Carly Morgenthau in the show, the people who've survived for the last 5 years, this solution will definitely suck, because any money that she and everyone else around her have earned honestly in the past 5 years of working will instantly be worth half or less than it was before, and items will suddenly cost at least double. People who are disenfranchised or below the poverty line have now spent the last 5 years earning more than they could have ever earned before, because now their labor is more needed than ever in a post-snap world. Suddenly, though, with all this inflation, they're disenfranchised again, and all the money that they've earned is worth a fraction of what it used to be. On top of all of it, with this massive population flood, labor now becomes incredibly cheap. There are so many people who need jobs, so the competition to actually keep the job that you had during the blip is going to be completely impossible. So at that point, you have 3.5 billion people who are sort of okay, 3.5 billion people who are pretty mad at the other half, and very, very expensive bread for everyone. So what is Captain America's plan here? Well, he might actually have the answers, even though he doesn't feel like sharing. In The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, we watched Sam deal with a lot